Good evening, everyone. My name is Sue Murphy, and I serve as the president of the Robert H. Jackson Center. It's my pleasure to welcome you here this evening to meet Ms. Carlotta LaNier, our distinguished guest speaker for the Jackson Center's 13th annual Young Readers Program. Most everyone gathered here tonight is very familiar with the Jackson Center and the important educational work we do. Education was very important to Justice Jackson. It was so important, he actually decided to go to high school for an extra or a 13th year after graduating so he could expand his education and hone his writing abilities. Reading and writing were two lifelong pursuits Jackson valued highly. In fact, Justice Jackson is thought by many people, including several of his peers on the United States Supreme Court, to have been the most eloquent writer in the Supreme Court's history. Jackson's prioritization of education is one reason why the Jackson Center created its Young Readers Program 13 years ago, using literature to engage young people with their world by inspiring them to read and hone their analytical skills and writing abilities. Please help me thank our sponsors making this year's program possible. We have the New York Bar Association Law, Youth, and Citizenship Program, the Southern Chautauqua Federal Credit Union, Alstrom and Schaefer Electric Corporation, Campbell and Associates, AA Vineyards, E.E. Austin and Son, Inc., Evans Discount Wine and Liquor, Hope's Windows, Jamestown Mattress, Lakeshore Savings, Lewis & Lewis, PC, and Robo Enterprises. Tomorrow, Ms. Carlotta LaNier will address close to 1,500 students and educators in person from 12 public schools, one independent school, and some homeschooled students as well. In addition, the two addresses will be live streamed to BOCES participating schools and also to schools in neighboring Pennsylvania. In all, we will be sharing Ms. LaNier's journey with several thousand young people and their teachers. Prioritizing education was, and still is, of the utmost importance to our special guest. Before I turn the program over to Jackson Center board member and co-founder Greg Peterson for a discussion with Ms. LaNier about her mighty long way, please join me in welcoming her here to the Jackson Center in Jamestown, New York.
Thank you. This is special. This is a private showing. So we did not advertise this to the public at large. This means you're special, just so you wonder. And one of the things my son, who was just here over the weekend, said, Dad, when do you have your next big event? And I told him it's tonight. And he said, well, who's the rock star? I said, it's not a function of a rock star. We have the Little Rock 9 star here. We're lucky. And this is our 13th year, and it's something which was a direct descendant of Jackson's view towards education. And I just want to call out Anita Sanctuary. She's here. Anita was there day one when we conceived the idea and brought in Jerry Spinelli, was our special author that time. And since then, we've had many of them, including, I know you're a fan of Jackie Robinson, and Sharon Robinson was here one year as well. So thank you, Anita, for everything. We also have some special guests among us. Michael Perley. Michael is here as an attorney with Hurwitz Fine up in Buffalo, but most importantly for our purposes, he is the head of a wonderful educational opportunity which is held in Buffalo at the Robert H. Jackson Federal Courthouse annually at Constitution Day. So this will be our 5th year, and we're looking forward to that opportunity. So thank you, Mike, and Mike's wife's here. Mike, still here? And without any, we asked to do this under some judicial guidance, all these things here. We have Judge Joseph Gerasi at the ripe young age of 90. He is here. Judge Gerasi, thank you for coming right there. And Judge Morgan. Judge Morgan, you have something to look forward to getting to 90, which will be a long ways away. I'm looking forward to this terrifically, and the real reason is, well, there are many reasons, But from a practical matter, the Robert Jackson Center is here and created in 2001 to advance the legacy of Justice Robert Jackson. And Justice Jackson is the answer to the jeopardy question and the only person in the history of the United States to be a Solicitor General, Attorney General, and a Justice of the Supreme Court. And as part of that, being Justice of the Supreme Court, he was involved in the seminal case of Brown versus Board of Education. He was part of the unanimous court, and we actually spent almost 2 years studying the case. And Linda Brown came here as the culmination of that study, and we learned an awful lot of the activity of the Supreme Court, the activity of Justice Jackson behind the scenes in order to obtain that unanimity, which manifested in the opinion by Chief Justice Earl Warren. And then, of course, the continuum of Brown versus Board of Education 1 is Brown 2. Brown 2 said that thou shalt integrate with all deliberate speed. And of course, that terminology took on life of its own, because you can imagine our political officials in the South meant deliberate speed as very slow and deliberate speed, and other places differently. And so the really first test of that Brown versus Board 1, followed up by Brown versus Board 2, was Little Rock. And to have Carlotta, Walls, LaNier, who was there, here, is a big deal. And I mean that sincerely. And I can't thank you enough for agreeing to come and being part of tomorrow. But as for tonight, we're going to have a little private opportunity to get to know a little bit more about you. But to get our heads wrapped around the life and times of the Little Rock Nine in 1957, we got a little short video vignette. So if we could show that.
An event that forever altered the course of race relations in America. As our image reveals itself, the 1957 school year is about to begin, and an angry mob is trying to stop 9 black students from entering Central High in Little Rock, Arkansas.
The question I usually get asked is, were we scared? I think initially we didn't anticipate clearly all of the violence and turmoil that occurred. The first day that we attempted to go to school, 8 of us were at one part of the school and Elizabeth Eckford was at another part. And it was the mob that followed Elizabeth. Then you begin to feel that this was a very hostile, violent group of people. Even at that point, I told myself that if we didn't go through with it, didn't attend Central and backed out, it would just reinforce the view that the African-American community in Little Rock wasn't interested in making a change in things.
The first step for the Little Rock Nine came in May 1954, when the U.S. Supreme Court issued its opinion in the landmark case Brown versus the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education. Separate but equal was inherently unequal, and integration was now the law of the land. In 1957, this decision and the power of the federal government were tested in Little Rock, Arkansas.
We didn't, at the moment we were selected, have any idea it was going to be as difficult as it turned out to be.
In the face of protests at Central High School, the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, calls out the National Guard. His official reasoning is to preserve the peace and prevent violence.
It clearly wasn't to protect us. It was to make a symbolic stand. It was to protect the way of life in the South, because they barred our entrance.
Hoping to throw open these school doors, President Dwight Eisenhower does the unprecedented. he calls in the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. Army.
I think President Eisenhower wanted to show that the federal government was supreme in this. And they could have done what they needed to do with 100 troops. But 1,000 paratroopers was really meant to send a message.
Under the guard of the U.S. Army, the students are finally able to do something seemingly very simple: go to school. But it would not be easy for Ernest Green or his 8 fellow black students.
School was like going to war every day. The walks from class to class were where, you had a lot of harassment, a lot of physical violence.
But Ernest Green persevered, becoming the first black graduate of Central High School with the class of 1958. Green would eventually go on to a successful banking career and government service in the Carter administration. But in 1958, integration was not complete in Little Rock. The following year, Governor Faubus closed all public schools in Arkansas instead of complying with desegregation. Schools in Arkansas would not be fully integrated until 1972. Yet, the world would always remember these 9 students who, by claiming their place in the classroom, were claiming their place in history.
Attending Central was special in the sense that it was part of history. It was part of a change. This was reverberating all over the country, all over the world.
What'd your dad do for a living?
My father was a brick mason. Had learned the trade from his father-in-law, who was a contractor.
Is he a native of Little Rock, Arkansas?
Native of Little Rock.
What?
World War II veteran.
What brought him here to Little Rock? Brought him there?
What brought him to
Or
Little
the family, what brought the family ultimately to Little Rock? Or has that just been a lifelong
Oh, yeah,
generations?
My family, the Walls family, really go back to the beginning of this country in North Carolina or thereabouts. But I've learned that, since my father's death and so forth. But Arkansas was where his father and family grew up.
Was slavery part of your genealogy?
Was
Slavery?
slavery? No.
No.
No, not on either side. It could have been on a, well, the stories. There's another book called The Road to Somewhere, and it was written by Dr. Brian Walls, who is Canadian, and that story tells, and we are connected, and there were two families basically there in North Carolina, and they went through the Underground Railroad to Canada, and I stay in contact with them.
Here's the most important question we're going to have all evening. What was your favorite baseball team?
Brooklyn Dodgers.
I think I read in the book, A Mighty Long Way, that, was it your uncle that actually took you to a Dodgers game?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was from Providence, Rhode Island, and from immigrant family, from Italy and Portuguese, Portugal, and he married into my father's sister there in New York City, and so he was the first to take me to Ebbets Field.
So you walk in, you see the green grass, and you're hoping to see Jackie Robinson.
Yes, yes.
What was your What was your chemistry? What was the reaction? I got to know this.
Well, in our community, we knew about Jackie Robinson, and I was even at the age of 6, 7 years of age. There were always those shoulders that we were standing on, and he happened to be one of those. And in a sport that I enjoyed as a kid as well. So he was up there for me. And for the way he carried himself, those lessons were learned by many of us in our family, that even though certain things are happening to you, that there's a way to combat it. So,
You went to school before you went to Central. What was the name of the school you went to?
I went to Dunbar Junior High School.
And at Dunbar, was it each person do you have classes in the first, second, third classes, or were they combined classes?
We had various periods, yes, like 7 periods a day,
Right.
where you would go to English or to math or to history, art, whatever. And so I was accustomed to changing classes. That's what you called it once you left elementary school and went into junior high school.
Yeah.
You were big then.
It was an all-black school.
It was all black. Black principal, black teachers, very good teachers.
At the time that Brown versus Board of Education was 1954.
Correct.
And did that mean anything to you? Did that mean anything to Dunbar? Did you have any? Do you remember
It
any?
was huge.
Yeah.
There was a newspaper that was written strictly for kids. Now, in some places it's still taking place. But it was called the Weekly Reader. And I'll never forget the headlines in that Weekly Reader. And it was discussed not only in my classroom, it was discussed at home, it was discussed at my church, at the YWCA. It was huge. And it basically emboldened the thought for me, for what my parents had been saying to me from cradle on, that the road to success was through education and to get all the education you possibly can get. So, and to be prepared to go through that door, whether it's a crack in the door or flung wide open. So to read that and to understand what that Supreme Court decision meant was big. Now, I'm going to be truthful with you. I thought sure come September of 1954 that I would be going to my neighborhood school, but that didn't take place.
Central was your?
No,
No?
I would have been going to West Junior High School, which was the white junior high school, because I was actually in the 6th grade when that took place. So in the 7th grade, I expected to be there, but it didn't take place that way.
When you asked your
I was in
parents,
the 7th grade, yeah.
when you asked your parents why not, what did they say?
Well, I was reading the paper. I was overhearing adults. I come from that generation that you speak when spoken to. You didn't question a whole lot, but you listened, and and you read a lot. And the statement was, the superintendent of schools stated that they were going to abide by the Supreme Court decision, but they must put a plan in place. Well, what that plan was to build 2 new high schools, one on the east side of town, the other one on the west side of town, predominantly black on one side, predominantly privileged whites on the other, and only integrate 1 high school. Now, even at the age of 12, I thought that was a little silly. I kind of thought that if you are not going to integrate all of the schools from elementary, through high school, then you really should start in elementary school and let kids grow up together. Now, that was my thought, but I didn't voice that, but that's what went through my mind. So the 2 new high schools had to be built. So that's why it took from 54 to 57 before we were able to go to Central.
So in the spring of 57, your teacher at Dunbar passes around a piece of paper.
Yes.
What's it say?
He had announced after reading, he was reading the bulletin, and halfway down he said, any of you who lives, and he gave some street boundaries, within these street boundaries and have any intentions of going to Central High School, please sign this sheet of paper. And he put it on the first desk, and it went around the room, and he went on to read the rest of the bulletin. So it was not a recruitment of anything, it was just a statement. So once that got to me, I signed the sheet of paper and gave it to the person behind me. Didn't think another thing of it. It was about time, I thought to myself, but they'll come up with some other reason. You know, that's how I viewed it, to the point that I didn't even mention it when I went home.
So at one point, some point down the road, your mom and dad probably get a letter saying, guess what?
Right.
Were you accepted to go to Central, or was it just sort of an automatic thing?
Well, I have since learned, you know, I make a statement that we elected to go to Central. Most people want to say you were selected. Now, maybe we were in the end, but that 117 who did sign up elected to go to Central. Now, I think that probably what took place was checking us out for our grades, our character, our community involvement, our church going. I'd call it the Jackie Robinson test today. But I think that that's probably what took place by some committee, and I can't tell you whether the NAACP was involved or whether it was strictly from the school board. I don't know. But maybe that's how the election part went about. But that would have been 39 of us.
Yeah.
And 39 sat in front of the superintendent of schools.
Were you interviewed at all?
No,
Your parents?
no.
No, so it was just somebody did some background check, and whether elected or selected, next thing you know, in the fall of 47, you're
57.
50,
right.
50, I'm sorry, fall of 57. I'm thinking 47 Jackie Robinson.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm
42,
I'm
42.
flashing. What was the lead up when you got the notice and said, congratulations? Yeah.
Well, it was a postcard that came and stated that I was to, on a certain date and time, I was to go to Central and register. So that was the first that my parents knew that I had shown some intentions of really going. So I can almost see the look on my father's face today that, so you plan to go to Central? And I said, yes. And I know he was proud of the fact that I had done that without discussion. And, you know, it was the right choice for me. I passed the school every day.
Yeah.
So, and I wanted to be a doctor then. So, and I knew what was happening in that school as compared to what lack of access and facilities that we had at my black junior senior high school.
What kind of indoctrination did you have there? Obviously, you knew that it was a white school, that this was going to be an integration opportunity. Before that September 4th date, did you gather together?
Well, first of all, it was really no indoctrination or being programmed or you know, any type of thing like that going on, other than a few of us. I didn't know the other. We all didn't know each other. So I really feel it was like in August, right before when the 39 of us was sitting there in front of the superintendent, is when I recognized who might be going or who is going to Central. I thought all 39 were going to show up, but that didn't happen. So, you know, as far as having learning how to deal with anger and harassment and all that sort of thing, you on your own. And we really didn't expect that. I don't think any of us really expected what happened on that day. It was really all about, here's my opportunity to go and get the best education available.
I'm going to show you, for lack of a better term, a flashcard, baseball card.
Yep.
Tell me who that is and what she meant to you.
This is Daisy Bates, who was the president of the Arkansas State NAACP group. And she was before her time. She worked, they had a newspaper. She and her husband had a newspaper there in Little Rock, in fact, the state of Arkansas. It's called the Arkansas Press. And I sold her papers. When I was like 8 years old, I had this little paper route, and I sold the newspapers that talked about everything that was going on in our community and in the country, especially with black people. Negroes or coloreds, as we were called at that time. So I knew who she was. She didn't necessarily recruit me, okay? My mother had a little desk at the state press. Every 2 years, she sold poll tax. And it was set up there in the newspaper office, and my mother volunteered that way by selling this poll tax so that black people could vote. And so I would see her, and I would always admired her. She was quite a dresser. She spoke well. She knew how to talk to reporters and to the news, to write articles in the newspaper and so forth. And she was not, a lot of people say that she is the one who was responsible for us. I cannot say that, okay? I can say that she spoke for the parents and for us to the media. And I think it was good because there was one voice coming out instead of getting a different story from 9 different parents or 9 different kids. So generally speaking, I would say, and we met at her house. This is one place that we would picked up every morning to go to school from their home, and we were brought back to their home. The military would bring us back there. So she would always want to get some debriefing from us. And I stopped doing it because I couldn't see any changes taking place. And I didn't want to relive what was going on. I mean, relive that day by talking about it. So I really didn't talk too much about, and I'm the youngest in the group. The oldest, I'd let them talk. Yeah. And even when I got home, I didn't want to relive what had taken place that day. And I didn't want to worry my parents any more than what they were going through.
There was a day one, that's September 4th, I believe.
Right.
1957, and you gathered, I think, at Daisy's house, right? And was there a game plan? Did they give you saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, we're going to drive you down?
No. September 4th, we did not meet at her home.
Okay.
September 4th, we met. I got a phone call. My parents got a phone call the night before to meet at 13th and Park. And everyone met there other than Elizabeth. She forgot to call Elizabeth or didn't drive out to Elizabeth's home to tell her parents. So Elizabeth knew that she was to go that day. She rode the bus and was on the other end of the campus where we all met at where we were supposed to meet, along with a number of ministers from the Little Rock Ministerial Alliance, which was a group of white and black ministers. And then we walked that one block up to the corner. And that is where we found the Arkansas National Guard. And, you know, there was a mob mentality across the street, a lot of strong words being thrown at us, and one thing after, but none of that really bothered me, to be honest with you. I didn't know what was happening to Elizabeth 2 blocks or 3 blocks down, but once we got home and saw what was on the news, we understood what had happened, why she was not in the group with us that day.
Walk me through the day. You're walking towards the central school. You're met by the National Guard. Then what happens?
Finally, the commander comes to us and speaks to the white minister and says, you need to take these kids and take them back home. And so Ernie's question, what do you mean, go home?
Ernie Green.
Ernie Green, right. And that's when he said, you're not going to let us walk up this sidewalk? And so the commander basically said then, we're here so that you don't go to school. We thought that they were really there to protect the citizens of Little Rock. And I surely considered myself a citizen. So it was very obvious that we weren't going to go to school that day. And so we did turn around, and my mother had dropped me off, so I had to, I don't even know who I caught a ride with that day. But that's when we went to, I guess the ministers probably took us to Mrs. Bates' house at that time. And then she wanted to know what had taken place. We told her. Although she had been up there earlier, and I think she saw some of the things that were going on, but then probably went back to her home. But from that day forward, we did meet at her home, especially when the 101st, 3 weeks later, when the 101st was our escorts and taking us to school. That's where we would rendezvous there at her place before and after school.
From that day one, which was the September 4th, and then you finally have an opportunity to go back under the guidance of the 101st Airborne. What was going on? What was that?
A lot of litigation. It was the courts going on. By that time, she had called, I think it was Mrs. Bates, who had called Roy Wilkins in New York, reported basically what had taken place, talked to Thurgood Marshall, and the next thing we know that Thurgood Marshall was coming to Little Rock. They filed whatever necessary papers, I guess it was necessary. And then there was to be a court hearing in the federal courts. And I like to say that those federal judges that should have heard the case probably went fishing, because they had to bring in a wonderful federal judge by the name of Ronald Davies out of Fargo, North Dakota. And he was probably 4'10". And he sat there and heard the case, and immediately, within 8 or 9 minutes, stated that Governor Faubus was incorrect in doing what he did and using the Arkansas National Guard to keep us out, and basically told us we had every right to go back to school. And I thought sure we were going back the very next day. But that's when Mrs. Bates said, well, you know, you never know. You know, yes, they have said that, but we don't know, you know, what type of protection you will have and stuff. And I'm still thinking, protection, you know, I felt that there would be people who did not want me there, but I figured after a couple of weeks they'd get used to it and it would die away, but it didn't happen that way. So
The card I want to show you now is Thurgood Marshall.
Yes.
And you had a chance to actually eyeball him and meet him, didn't you?
This is one of my heroes. And I had the opportunity to meet him when he came to Little Rock to represent us in court.
Did you go to court? Did you?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
That's
did
the
you?
first time I've ever been in a courtroom. And it was exciting to me. And what was really exciting was to see him as an African American presenting the case without, as an equal to anyone else in that room. And to present it to this little, Thurgood Marshall was a tall man, and then you got this little short guy as federal judge. And it was kind of funny just to kind of watch that as a, but he was the federal judge was very strong. He and Marshall. The attorney that represented Governor Faubus, who did not show up, was using all of the terms that we were accustomed to hearing. So, anyway, I thought we would have that right to go on to school, and we did on September 23rd. That was our second first day.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't last very long. By noon, we were out of the classroom and swiftly taken away from the school. You have in your video there, you showed the mob chasing a black man, tall black man, who happened to be a reporter. And he did not run. And the reason he did not run, he said later, is that he had watched what happened September 4th to Elizabeth, and he vowed from then on that he would not run again. He did in Florida when he saw a lynching take place, and he was moved by the fact that here was a 15-year-old who was taking this abuse and not running. Unfortunately, he died like 18 months afterwards from that blow on the head that they had beat him with a brick.
Governor Orville Faubus, either watching him on TV or listening to him on the radio, what was your sense at home when that term came up? Did your parents talk about him?
You mean before or after?
Well, during. You're September 4th, you plan on going to school, all of a sudden Faubus and company create a scheme which sort of denies that.
Well, prior to September 4th now, Governor Faubus was a moderate governor and had been supported by Negroes and whites to become the governor of Arkansas. He did not associate himself with segregationists or with liberals. He was just, down the middle. It was that group of people, especially from the southern part of Arkansas, White Citizens Council, that stayed in his office on a consistent basis, trying to get him to defy the Supreme Court decision and the school board, and not to allow us to go to school. And it took the governor out of Georgia, who had come to Arkansas, got this rally going, and I think that Faubus probably made that decision the night before. But when he came on television the night before, he basically said that he was bringing out the Arkansas National Guard to protect the citizens of Little Rock. He didn't say that he was to keep us out of the school. So from that time on TV to that morning, I guess the real orders was to keep us out. And
then on the 23rd, there was a sense, this was your second first day,
Right.
and there was a fear factor of the mob, really. I mean,
Right.
the mob was built, and
It had grown.
Yeah.
It was over 1,000 there at that point in time. And by that time, when I would hear the name Governor Faubus, I didn't care for it. Okay? And it got worse as the days went on. So I was not a fan of Orville Faubus from September 4th on. And my parents had voted for him that second term, but they never voted for him again.
yeah. At what point did you get a sense that this had risen to such a level that the President of the United States would intervene?
Well, in this 14-year-old mind, okay, I could not understand why the President had not put this governor in his place. Now, you know, I was not astute in states' rights and all of that sort of thing, but that's what it really boiled down to. It was the federal law and states' rights. And unfortunately, the President did not want to upset that Southern Manifesto. Now, I know that for a fact because his Attorney General told us that. The Attorney General at that time was trying to get him to send in the federal troops long before it happened. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to negotiate or talk to Faubus. Faubus goes to Camp David. They come out grinning and smiling, and, you know, TV's going there, and you thought that they had solved world peace or whatever. And I thought sure that we would be going to school the very next day. Again, Mrs. Bates says, we'll wait and see. So Faubus comes back. He does pull away the Arkansas National Guard, and that, the day later, is when we went, September 23rd, is when we did go to school, and it was only 17 Little Rock policemen there to hold back over 1,000 angry people. And we went in through a side door. And when kids were, and I didn't view all of this because my class was on the back end of the school. So I did not see these kids jumping out of the windows, screaming, they're in, you know, using other words and so forth. But I do recall vividly a policeman coming to my third class and my name being called to gather my books and follow him. And I did. And we were spirited down 3 levels below in the school into police cars. And I overheard one policeman tell the other policeman who was driving, put your foot to the floor and don't stop for anything. So that was the day. If any day I had any fear, it was during that time when I heard him say that. And we were told to stay underneath the blankets, but you know, you're a kid, you want to know what's going on. And it was dark out, you know, it was dark in that basement, and then all of us, and the car was driving so fast that I came out from under it. And all of a sudden, there was light. The doors opened and the car shot through. And if anyone had been crossing that sidewalk, they would have been killed instantly.
Yeah. Then Eisenhower makes a decision, makes an announcement very publicly on TV,
Right.
as we saw, that this can no longer be tolerated. It's
Right.
federal versus state rights, federal, and again, a court order they were trying to implement. And the 101st Airborne comes in. It's the first time the president called federal order to get in regard to school desegregation. What did you think, seeing this massive amount of troops?
I said, it's about time. That's really how I felt. One in the group today will say that President Eisenhower was our hero, or was her hero, because he did send in the 101st. And my feeling was, what took you so long? So, you know, we all have a different opinion on that, but I was happy that he did. But let me tell you, to have a helicopter buzzing over your school, 1,000 troopers bivouacked on your school grounds and on the football stadium, military trucks, jeeps. I mean, it sent a huge message that, you know, we'll have a chance to go to school that day. And we each had a bodyguard, and they marched us in, as you've seen on some of the videos, to be our protectors, basically.
During the school day, a normal school day, was there a lot of heckling, a lot of walking from class to class, people knocking your books over, those type of things?
Went on consistently, daily. It was, some of them, I think it was their job, really, to do that, even though you had the guard, but it was only so much that could be done. And unfortunately, we could, you know, they were asking us who were some of the harassers and so forth. Did you see them in your class? Who are you, what names are you turning in? Well, I did turn in a few names, but I also found out that that was going nowhere, so I was not going to spend a lot of time with that either. You also had to have 2 adults to verify whatever took place. So there was another way of a lot of those getting by because of what was needed to eliminate some of those kids from because they weren't doing well in class anyway. They were those tight to start with. They weren't what I would call good students. If they had time enough to harass me and my 8 comrades, I mean, you know, what else were they doing?
Did it surprise you that you started off with an initial assembly 39 and then there was just 9? Mm-hmm. Did it ever pause and say, whatever happened to the other 30?
Well, that question really came up with the fellas in the group. I think they were a little put, they wondered whatever happened to those that said they were coming with us. And that, I'm sure you would really have to ask them why they didn't go, but I have a lot of, I'm sure parents worried about their kids. Some worried whether they were going to lose their jobs when they found out that which really did happen within the 9 of us families. They overheard things in homes that they worked in. So, and then there was another big issue. One was, and that was really, that we could not participate in any extracurricular activity. Okay, all we could do was go to school, leave the grounds when it's over, and come back the next day. So we couldn't be in the choir or the band, or we couldn't work on the yearbook, could not be on any team sport. You couldn't do any of that. And all of us had really been those types of people, you know, that we did in our past schools that we attended. So I think that some decided not to do it because they knew that they couldn't continue to do those sort of things.
What about home? Was there retribution against your mom, dad, your
Very
dad?
much so.
Yeah. And how so?
I think 3 of the parents, well, and my father, so 4, I know, lost their jobs, especially when one was a teacher in another school system. Lost her job. She had to go back, take them to court to get her job back. Another worked for the International Harvester. He lost his job. When people recognize, or where my father, the type of work he did was building churches and schools. When they would find out that he was a part of the crew, he was let go. So that hurt. The second thing was my father would not allow me to drive anywhere, okay? So we had, and that happened with the others, that the parents had to drive you to wherever you were going because they didn't know what might happen to you, I think. And it did happen a number of times, even when we were in, my father was driving, my mother's in the front seat, my sisters and I in the back seat, and you stop at a stoplight, and all of a sudden they see who you are and they know you, and the next thing you have is either, you know, being spat upon, which my mother was, with the windows being down, name calling, trying to run you off the road. That happened more than once with my father. So those are the sort of things that took place.
You made the honor roll that year.
I did.
Congrats.
I stayed focused. I decided that it's a lot behind that. You know, I had been a part of the National Honor Society. I'd been a student body vice president. I was doing the things that I thought I was supposed to do, right? And my father always did say that his job was to put a roof over our heads and food on the table and clothes on our backs. And we only had one job, and that was to bring him A's and B's. So I did all I could to do that. So I knew I could not do other things at the school, so I stayed focused on doing well in my classroom. Not only that, I had no one to call in the evening if I did not get the proper notes or what have you. So I did well testing, and even with all that was going on around me, I was not on the telephone with any friends because my closest friends were at Horace Mann High School, and we're in different environments now. The only phone calling that came on a continuous basis was nasty phone calls. So all I could do was listen to the radio, play records, and study.
Who did you listen to on the radio?
Oh, I listened to quite a few. I was, there was a radio station in Tennessee that I listened to late at night, and then one in Delroy, Texas that I listened to late at night. So all of the latest people that were.
Was this rock and roll time period?
Yeah, it was all rock and roll. I mean, heck, it was American Bandstand on TV every day. So.
Was Dinah Washington part of your world?
Oh, one of my favorites. Okay. You see, my grandfather owned a restaurant, kind of cafe with jukebox and stuff, so I heard all the good music.
During the summer of '58, you've just made the honor roll. This is your first year. You completed that. There was sort of a celebration where the Little Rock 9, having completed its first year, having integrated Little Rock, you actually did sort of a Chicago, Cleveland, I don't want to say victory lap, but it was, you went to several locations.
We did. Chicago was actually the first trip, and it was the Chicago Defender that honored us, and which is an African-American newspaper that is still in existence today. John Sinstack was the owner. And so that was our first trip, and it meant a lot to us to see that many people at this banquet to honor us. And it was kind of hard to, it was kind of mind-blowing, to be honest with you, because I had been told all along, you know, what we were doing for our race. Well, that was not the real reason we were going to school there. But you were putting more on my shoulders by saying that. If that happens, then that's fine. But I really did start to understand that more when I saw so many people out there in that audience of 600-700 people come into these various banquets, or 1,000 people, or what have you. And then in July, we went to Cleveland, Ohio to receive the highest honor that the NAACP gives, which is the Spingarn Medal, which remained with me as the highest honor ever until the Congressional Gold Medal.
Sure. Well.
So the two of them are right there together.
You also had a chance to meet this guy.
Dr. Martin Luther King, you're absolutely correct. I met him while we were at Central. So actually it was, I think it was August of 1957. And he had come to Little Rock. And I'm not sure what he was there for, but he was like 25, 26, 27 years of age at that time. And, you know, he was not the orator that you know of today. He was just a young preacher, the way I saw him, okay? And he was quiet. He didn't talk a lot. But he did enjoy barbecue and beer.
Don't we all?
And that's what I remembered him in that first meeting. And, you know, some people cringe when I say that, but that's exactly how I remembered him. But then I was in his company a number of times after I was in college and so forth.
You go to New York City, you met Robert Wagner, Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the UN, Ralph Bunce, Adam Clayton Powell,
Yep.
senior and junior. For a 15-year-old, probably at that time,
Right.
this is pretty heady stuff.
It was. It really was. I mean, the people I had read about, you know, and the big things that they had done, Ralph Bunche was huge. Dag Hammarskjöld was huge. I'll never forget when he was killed in that airplane crash. It really hurt me. Averell Harriman, I was on cloud 9. I mean, here was the governor of New York, to go to UN and see all of these people, and for Robert Wagner, who was the mayor of New York City, to honor us the way that he did. All of the media exposure that took place. I mean, this was big stuff in New York City, the city in the United States. So yes, it was for a 15-year-old that was big.
Then you come back to Little Rock after this tour in 1958, and guess what?
School's closed.
Governor Faubus found a way.
He closed all of the high schools in Little Rock. 3,600 kids had no way to get an education, a high school education. And, you know, if that had happened today, don't you think that people would have just gotten just unnerved and thrown out the governor and the school board and everyone else as far as that goes? But that's what he did. And that group of people who had supported him thought it was fine. And so more litigation takes place. So it's back into the federal courts. And with that, it was, you know, come October, we really realized this was going to take a while. And by that time, the juniors who would have been seniors decided to do other things. 2 went to California. 1 was already in New York. 1 one of the sophomores who was with me, father refused to let her go back to Central anyway, and he had sent his wife and daughter to Kansas City. And I remained, Jefferson remained, who was a sophomore becoming a junior with me. And two of the juniors that were going to be seniors stayed, and they were they took correspondence courses along with me at the University of Arkansas. So that's how I got most of my 11th grade year, and they got half of their senior year.
And finally, the Supreme Court, through Chief Justice Earl Warren, ordered the integration.
Right.
And then you're back at school in 59, right?
In 59, yes.
Your senior year. Had much changed when the doors open and there you are, and it's now a few of you?
It was some visible changes. First of all, we didn't have the 101st Airborne. We had no military we had no guards. And I would say that the leadership changed because they were sophomores with me when we initially started this, and they didn't want to see the same thing repeated. Now, did they embrace me? No, but they were a little bit more, they voiced their opinions a little bit more than what the first group in the leadership in 57, 58. Now, they will disagree. That leadership of the president and his little cabinet of 1957, 58 disagrees with that, but it was new to them, just as it was to us. But let's be real, you know, I do feel that if they had stood up and really put their peers in place, I think things would have been a little bit different.
We have a lot of teachers here, and we've talked a lot about the student reaction of 2, 4, 6, 8, we ain't going to integrate. What were the teachers' reactions?
Well, they were a reflection of the society. You had some very good teachers that were disciplinarians that had control of their classes. You had some teachers there that wished this would all go away. And then there was some teachers there that did not like the change that was taking place. And they pretty much let you know that. And I had one who was my Spanish teacher, who should have retired before I got there. And she did, actually, that fall, in October or November. But what was interesting to me is that my best teacher, the one that I felt that was one who really was there to help me or to teach me and to be protective of all of his students in his class, was her son. And that was my biology teacher. And he had graduated from Central, had gone to college, gone to the Korean War, had seen the world, and returned to Little Rock to teach at his alma mater, and had been teaching there for probably 4 or 5 years when that happened. And he encouraged me to participate in science fairs, knowing that what could happen. But he really wanted me to do all that I could do, and he would be there to, you know, catch me if I fall or what have you. And I did come in 3rd place in one of them, one of the science fairs. And I could not go up on the stage to get that never would have worked. So he picked up my little certificate and so forth. But I've thought about that in so many ways, that his mother was very adamant about not wanting to teach kids of color. And there he was, a man who went out of his way to make sure that I learned and got the best out of it and to participate where I could. And I thought that he grew up at his mother's table. He loved his mother. He took the good from her and left the other stuff behind.
Yeah, what a lesson. That year, your senior year, though, didn't go without incident. On February 9th, 1960,
1960.
something pretty dramatic happened at home.
My home was bombed. And it took a lot of air out of me, I would say, because after 2 weeks of not finding the person or persons that did it, late at night, it was probably about 10:30, 11 o'clock, the police and FBI came to our home and asked my father to come down to the police station. And that was to give them some more information. The next morning, he was not there. And I couldn't understand that. I thought he had gone down with them, but they had brought him back, but that was not the case. I went to school, and I came home, and he still was not home. So my mother had already contacted his father and had told Mrs. Bates what had happened too. And my grandfather was the one who knew a few people down at the police station and found out that he was being interrogated for bombing his own home. So unfortunately, he was kept for 72 hours.
Your dad's in prison.
Right, in jail. And he was beaten. They were trying to force him to sign that he had bombed his own home so that they could close the case.
And the purpose would be for what, to get insurance? Is that the idea?
Well, we later found out that they wanted to say that he was trying to get insurance for bombing, due to the fact that he was not working consistently and so forth and so on. And unfortunately, they did indict 2 men. One was my father's friend. Another was my friend, who was my age, who lived a block away, who spent 2 years of a 5-year sentence for bombing my home, which I knew he hadn't done. And they're in the process now in Arkansas of hoping to get that expunged from his records and so forth. He went on to do well in Michigan, and we talk constantly. The other man never went to prison. He had probably a better lawyer, number one, and he died like 3 or 4 years after that, and he was in his 30s. So I don't know what all took place from that, but that is what happened. And that was February 9th, 1960, and I graduated May 30th, 1960. And the next day, I caught the first thing smoking out of Little Rock, never ever wanting to return.
Yeah. So they announce your name, Carlotta Walls, and getting a degree. What did you think?
I had completed what I started. And it validated all that I had gone through. And it was, all I needed was that sheet of paper, because that was the validation. And those 3 years of the name-calling, the harassment, the pushing down the steps, the being spat upon, the ink on your clothes, breaking into your lockers every other day, having to change into another set of clothes during the day, all of that sort of stuff, the sheet of paper meant that much to me. So today, it is a part of the exhibit in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So I feel proud about that.
Well, we're proud of you. When you smoked out of Little Rock the following day, I know, having read the book, which is a phenomenal book, by the way.
Thank you.
You really sort of ran away from the experience. I mean, you didn't really want to talk about it.
I didn't want to talk about it. Didn't talk about it for 30 years.
And the context within which it finally, at least I think it came up, was kind of a documentary on movie. Was that the crisis at Central High that was sort of on television?
Oh, that was Mrs. Huckabee, the vice principal, had written a book, and David Susskind was the producer of that. And that was the first, really, of it kind of smack dab in my face. And I had 2 young kids, one probably 2, 3 years of age, and the other one 6. And the movie was Hollywood, okay, because there were some things in there that were not quite true. But one in particular, for those of you who have seen it or will see it, because they do play it every February on Disney Channel for Black History Month. But well, no, not that one. I was thinking about Ernie Green's story. But the Crisis at Central High was the one with Joanna Woodward playing Mrs. Huckabee. And she did a pretty good job, but she showed a little bit more compassion than what actually happened.
So when you finally sit down and talk to your children, they must have been curious about, hey, Mom, you're being portrayed.
Well, I tried, they're 6 and 3, and it was only so much I could say to them then. But as they got older, they would see things, and they would see this documentary. They would also see the Ernie Green story. So then that's when more discussion took place. And, pardon me, the fact at the 40th anniversary was when it was really necessary well, they were seeing things and hearing things to the point that my son was, and I noticed that with Gloria's son as well, how angry they were because they were seeing how their mothers had been treated at that age. So it's kind of tough for them, especially for the males within the families. And I remember Gloria making the comment that it was worrying her because her son was taking it out in doing extreme boxing, extreme sports or whatever. But he's gotten over that now to the point that he's doing other things. But that's how he was taking his frustration out.
Before I forget it, this all happens in the late 50s. You actually graduate in 1960. During that time period is the Cold War. Does it strike you that we're kind of the Russian, how they perceive what's going on here in the United States with the black?
I contend that is the reason that President Eisenhower sent in the 101st, because, as you know, during those days, you had 15 minutes of national news and 15 minutes of local news. You didn't have 24/7 of news. The newspapers and the TV is showing this, and ours was the second biggest story for the year of 57, and 57, 58, and Sputnik was the story. So here we are, you know, contending against Russia. Russia gets into space before we do, and we've got fixed bayonets on kids. And Russia is saying, so that is what you call democracy? You know, so I really think that the real general came out in President Eisenhower to at least say to the world that this is, you know, we live by this Constitution, and this is a democratic society that we live in, and communism is not the way to go. And Russia is saying communism is number one. You've got fixed bayonets on kids. So, you know, that going back and forth, I really think that that's one of the biggest reasons that President Eisenhower had to show the world that we were a democratic country.
Because that's amazing optics when you just think about that.
Right.
I'll talk about optics. You were awarded the highest award that can be given.
Right.
What was that ceremony like? I've never talked to anybody who got one of those.
It's amazing. Truly amazing. First of all, when I heard that this bill had been dropped on the floor, as the term they use, I kind of chuckled. I said, it takes both sides of the aisle, doesn't it, to agree to do that? And I didn't think that that would take place, that both sides of the aisle would agree to give to the Little Rock Nine the Congressional Gold Medal. When the Senate immediately passed it, or very soon after, but then it was the House that took a while. And then that finally happened. I will tell you that the reason that it took a while is because the state of New Jersey's representative wanted the Statue of Liberty on this coin that Sacagawea ended up on. And they were holding that against. So anyway, I was a part of that bill, I guess. So to attend that ceremony, President Clinton was the president at that time, and he asked Congress to allow the presentation to take place at the White House, because normally it takes place on the Hill. And they agreed to let that happen. So the Hill came to the White House. We were there. Our families were there. And it was quite a moving ceremony. I just get chills when I think about it today. So with that, you know, I was the only person in the state of Colorado with a Congressional Gold Medal.
Well, I can tell you, you're the only one in this room, that's for sure. And the only one I can recall.
Right.
What's the legacy of this all? You've written, again, you have this magnificent book. You've gone from running away from this concept to embracing it in the form and manifesting it in the book, which is part of what you're talking about
Right.
tomorrow to 1,600 students here. So what's the Reader's Digest legacy?
Well, I want, first of all, for kids to know how important education is. That and the fact that you're standing on others' shoulders. You know, what I did was just a piece of this whole story of this country, and that they have an opportunity to that really ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And most kids are ordinary kids. So you never know where you're going to end up. You get the best out of what you have available to you. Know who you are. I tell them that all the time, and I will tell that to kids tomorrow. Get to know who you are. And I think I had a lot of, I feel that my parents instilled that in me from the beginning, that I was just as good as the next person. And my attitude, as I have from Little Rock Central High on, was, it's your problem. It's not mine. I know who I am. I know what rights I have and what I can do with it. So I really do want to see young people to take advantage of whatever is available to them and make the most out of it and move on.
One of the reviewers of the book said, searing and emotionally gripping, this book should be required reading for every child of every race who may be trying to appreciate the values of education and the challenges that they might present for people who are different. And this has been an incredible day for me, for us, to have you among us, and we salute you. And thank you for being part of the Robert Jackson mission here, because you embody it as well as anybody.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to be here. I'm very happy to spend this time with you and those here in the audience, and the children tomorrow.
Oh, there'll be a lot of them. Carlotta LaNier, ladies and gentlemen.